What strange truths lurked behind Hollywood's golden age glamour? Beneath the dazzling lights and polished smiles, stars hid wild secrets while studios orchestrated incredible deceptions. These 15 bizarre true stories reveal how real Hollywood was often stranger than the movies themselves. Clark Gable's $60,000 smile remains one of the most striking examples. Want to take this opportunity of expressing my thanks and sincere gratitude to Mr. Frank Capra, the director of It Happened One Night. Gable was the face of Hollywood royalty, the leading man who defined a generation. Women swooned at his smile and men envied his effortless charm. Yet behind that iconic grin was a carefully hidden truth that cost MGM a fortune and revealed just how far studios would go for perfection. By the time Gable was melting hearts and Gone with the Wind, very few knew that his smile was entirely artificial. Having lost most of his teeth by age 32 due to gum infections and ill-fitting bridges, Gable required custom dentures. MGM commissioned them at a price equivalent to $60,000 today. Still, these prosthetics weren't flawless. Co-stars often whispered about his foul breath, worsened by both the dental work and his smoking habits, though they were forbidden from speaking of it publicly. The effort to preserve his flawless image illustrates the extreme measures Hollywood employed to protect its stars. Publicists, fixers, and even dentists were part of a system built to shield the mystique of Hollywood's elite. In Gable's case, even his bodily imperfections were concealed to protect his throne as the King of Hollywood. His charisma was undeniable, but the reality is sobering. The man who could steal a scene with a grin was in truth masking a painful, uncomfortable reality with every smile. His dentures became a symbol of Hollywood's broader illusion, an industry where perfection was manufactured, no matter the cost. Judy Garland's diet of coffee, cigarettes and pills paints an even darker portrait. And they've been engaged for over 2 years, and I'm just terribly happy, terribly proud. Garland was just 16 when she starred in The Wizard of Oz, already under relentless pressure from MGM to maintain a particular image. Executives deemed her too chubby to be a leading lady and enforced a punishing diet. Her meals consisted of little more than chicken broth, black coffee, and pills designed to suppress her appetite. She was also given amphetamines to keep her energy high during filming, beginning a lifelong struggle with addiction. If she gained weight, she faced financial penalties. Studio employees monitored her constantly. The cruelty extended beyond food. She was forced to wear a tight corset that compressed her already thin frame. This control tormented her body and her psyche. The message that she was never good enough in her natural form haunted her for life. Dependency on stimulants and sleeping pills created a vicious cycle she could never fully escape. Despite several attempts at rehabilitation, the trauma of her early years proved nearly impossible to undo. Behind the radiant image the world adored, Garland was quietly breaking down. Her luminous performances masked a young woman who was overworked, overmedicated, and scrutinized at every turn. The brutality of her diet is one of the most disturbing examples of how Hollywood exploited its stars under the guise of glamour. Today she is remembered as a phenomenal talent, but her life story remains a tragic, cautionary tale. Her decline did not begin with personal flaws. It began with a studio system that treated her not as a human being, but as a product to be shaped, sold, and silenced. John Barrymore's post-mortem prank blurs the line between theater and the macabre. Taken you in his arms, he'd have been tender. Instead of that, he stalked out of the room. Barrymore, patriarch of one of America's most legendary acting dynasties, was known as much for his theatrical excesses off stage as for his brilliance on it. Yet his most unforgettable act occurred after his death. When Barrymore passed in 1942, his friends honored him in the only way eccentric Hollywood pranksters could, by borrowing his corpse. According to the story, director Raoul Walsh, a close friend, removed Barrymore's body from the funeral home and propped it in a chair at his home. The purpose was simple: to shock fellow actor Errol Flynn, who returned drunk from a night out, only to find Barrymore's lifeless body sitting upright, as if waiting. Flynn screamed in terror, convinced the dead had risen. Though accounts vary, both Flynn and others close to Barrymore confirmed versions of the tale in memoirs and interviews. The bizarre incident even inspired scenes in a 1981 film, cementing it into Hollywood folklore. Far more than a prank, this was a twisted but affectionate farewell to a man whose life had been one grand performance. Barrymore had long been notorious for his drinking, parties, and irreverent humor. In death, his friends believed he would have appreciated the audacity. The stunt reveals much about Hollywood's strange culture, where the line between myth and reality blurred even in matters as solemn as death. Barrymore, who had become a caricature of himself in his later years due to alcoholism, was granted a final curtain call both grotesque and oddly fitting. The prank epitomized the surreal camaraderie of Hollywood's elite, where egos, eccentricities, and fame collided in bizarre ways. Even in death, Barrymore remained the ultimate showman. Thelma Todd's mysterious death stands as one of the most chilling cases in Hollywood history. Todd, beloved comedic actress of the early 1930s, charmed audiences in films with the Marx Brothers and Laurel and Hardy. But her life ended abruptly at just 29, under circumstances so strange that her death remains unsolved. In December 1935, she was discovered dead in her car, parked in a garage. Officially, the cause was listed as carbon monoxide poisoning. Yet the bizarre state of the scene raised immediate suspicion. She was dressed in an evening gown, a mink coat, and still wore her diamond jewelry. Blood was found on her face, and the car keys were still in the ignition. Stranger still, the garage was locked from the inside. The night before, Todd had attended a party and was said to be in good spirits. But she was also entangled in perilous relationships. Her ex-husband, Pat DiCicco, had a violent history and still controlled part of her restaurant business. She had also drawn the interest of gangster Lucky Luciano, who allegedly pressured her to allow a casino inside her establishment, a proposition she refused. Despite these leads, the investigation was cursory and inconclusive. Authorities quickly ruled her death accidental, possibly self-inflicted, though evidence suggested otherwise. Insiders whispered that studio pressure helped bury the scandal, as Hal Roach Studios, where Todd was under contract, risked losing millions if her reputation were tainted. Over the decades, her case has been revisited countless times by historians, crime authors, and fans alike, but no clear answers have surfaced. Todd's death remains a chilling reminder of how fame, power, and corruption could intertwine in Hollywood, with deadly consequences. The dazzling colors of The Wizard of Oz enchanted generations of viewers, but behind the magic was a serious human cost. The early Technicolor process used in the 1939 film required an enormous amount of light to capture its vibrant hues on camera. Actors were forced to perform beneath blazing arc lamps that drove set temperatures above 100° F. That was only the beginning. To withstand the lighting, performers wore layers of specially formulated makeup that resembled industrial paint more than cosmetics. It was so toxic that it left rashes, irritated eyes, and in some cases, permanent skin damage. Removing it meant scrubbing with harsh solvents that stripped the skin raw. Buddy Ebsen, the original Tin Man, suffered the most tragic consequences. The silver makeup contained aluminum dust that he inhaled, collapsing his lungs and forcing his hospitalization. He was replaced by Jack Haley, who donned a slightly modified but still dangerous version of the same makeup. Margaret Hamilton, the Wicked Witch of the West, endured second-degree burns when a pyrotechnic effect malfunctioned and her copper-based green makeup seeped into the wounds. To make matters worse, the cast was required to sign health waivers acknowledging risks of temporary blindness, heat exhaustion, and severe skin injuries. Between takes, many hid under fans or plunged into ice water just to stay conscious. What audiences saw as a whimsical fantasy was born out of grueling and hazardous conditions. No one dared to complain. The studios controlled the press and the show had to go on. It was only decades later that cast members revealed the toll the film had taken on them. For all its beauty, The Wizard of Oz was a harrowing ordeal. It remains a classic, but one forged through sacrifices the public never imagined. In 1961, The Misfits was expected to be a landmark film, an emotional study of loneliness, disillusionment, and the fading American West. Written by Arthur Miller for his wife Marilyn Monroe, it starred Monroe alongside Clark Gable and Montgomery Clift. Yet behind the curtain of Hollywood glamour, the production unraveled under brutal conditions and strange tragedies that would later feed whispers of a curse. The Nevada desert served as the backdrop, where daytime temperatures soared above 110 degrees F. Monroe, already in fragile health, relied increasingly on pills and alcohol. Her marriage to Miller was collapsing, and she frequently arrived late or missed entire days on set, stalling production and raising tensions. Clark Gable, then 59, insisted on performing his own stunts, being dragged by horses, thrown violently to the ground, and laboring under the relentless desert sun. Days after filming Wrapped, he suffered a massive heart attack and died. Many blamed the physical strain of the shoot. Monroe, devastated by Gable's death and spiraling deeper into depression, overdosed a year later. Montgomery Clift, once one of Hollywood's brightest stars, was a shadow of himself. A car crash had permanently altered his face, and he battled addiction, chronic pain, and mental decline throughout filming. He died only 5 years later at 45. Director John Huston's gambling addiction often kept him away from set, holed up in casinos while chaos reigned. The constant turmoil compounded the emotional strain for everyone involved. Though the finished film earned critical acclaim and is now hailed as a classic, it exacted a devastating price. The Misfits stands today not only as cinema, but as the tragic last chapter for three legendary stars whose final roles were laced with eerie foreshadowing. Carl Alfalfa. Switzer became a household name as the mischievous, freckle-faced boy in the beloved Our Gang, or Little Rascals comedies of the 1930s. Yet, the fame that brought him adoration as a child cast a long shadow over his adult life. Struggling to escape his on-screen persona, Switzer found little success in Hollywood and drifted through odd jobs, from bartending to dog breeding. In 1958, while working as a hunting guide and dog trainer, his life took a tragic turn. He helped recover a lost hunting dog for a man named Moses Stilts, who paid him a $50 reward. Switzer, however, demanded more compensation, claiming expenses. Days later, allegedly intoxicated, he appeared at Stilts' home to press the matter. An argument broke out. Stilts later claimed Switzer struck him and pulled a knife, prompting him to fire a gun in self-defense. The bullet struck Switzer in the groin, and he bled to death before reaching a hospital. He was only 31. The case was ruled justifiable homicide, and Stilts faced no charges. Yet conflicting accounts, including one from a teenage witness, suggested Switzer may not have been the aggressor at all. Despite his fame as a child star, the tragedy drew little press, overshadowed by bigger Hollywood headlines. His fall from beloved prankster to obscure victim of violence is a grim reminder of the darker side of Hollywood's golden years. Howard Hughes is remembered as both an aviation pioneer and a Hollywood mogul, but his eccentricities often overshadowed his genius. One of his strangest obsessions involved actress Jane Russell and a peculiar contraption he engineered to accentuate her figure on screen. While producing the western The Outlaw in the 1940s, Hughes felt Russell's appearance wasn't striking enough. Drawing from his aviation expertise, he designed a cantilevered bra with structural wiring and padding to defy gravity and lift Russell's bust without straps. The result was bizarrely uncomfortable. Russell refused to wear it, secretly using her own undergarments to mimic the effect Hughes wanted. Remarkably, he never realized the difference, and the final shots achieved his vision without his invention. Yet, Hughes's fixation with women extended far beyond costumes. As head of RKO Pictures, he kept meticulous records of female contract players' body measurements, sometimes casting or firing them solely based on changes to their figures. Over time, his behavior grew increasingly erratic. He isolated himself, avoided face-to-face meetings, communicated only through notes, and even wore tissue boxes on his feet to avoid germs. Still, he exerted total control over his studio, issuing commands from afar. Hughes's life was a strange blend of brilliance and madness. While his innovations advanced aviation and film, his obsessions with women revealed the disturbing extremes of unchecked power. George Reeves, remembered as Superman, became the center of one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries, the strange case of his death. What you whispered was so private that I don't think you even wanted me to hear it. In the 1950s, George Reeves was a household name, thanks to his iconic portrayal of Superman in the television series Adventures of Superman. But in June 1959, tragedy struck when Reeves was found dead in his home with a gunshot wound to the head. The official ruling declared it self-inflicted, yet the circumstances were so contradictory and peculiar that conspiracy theories have persisted ever since. Reeves's body was discovered in his upstairs bedroom by his fiancée, Leonore Lemon, along with several guests who had been partying downstairs. According to Lemon, Reeves went to bed while the others stayed up drinking. Moments later, they heard a gunshot. Oddly, the group waited more than 45 minutes before contacting the police, and some reports suggest the crime scene may have been tampered with during that time. Physical evidence only deepened the mystery. Reeves's body bore unexplained bruises. The gun had no fingerprints, and the bullet casing was found beneath him, an unusual placement for a self-inflicted wound. Adding to the doubts, Reeves had plans for his upcoming wedding and appeared to be enjoying a renewed enthusiasm for his career, hardly the signs of a man preparing to end his life. His personal life complicated matters further. For years, Reeves had been romantically involved with Toni Mannix, the wife of MGM executive Eddie Mannix. Rumors swirled that Eddie had mafia connections, leading some to speculate that Reeves' death was a retaliation for breaking off his affair with Toni. Others pointed fingers at Leonore Lemon, though no charges were ever filed. Despite the public's fascination and numerous books written on the case, the LAPD never reopened the investigation and stood firmly by its original conclusion. Still, many believe the truth was buried to shield powerful figures in Hollywood. The only certainty is that the man who once embodied Superman died under circumstances that created far more questions than answers. Few rivalries in Hollywood history compare to the intensity and sheer strangeness of the feud between Joan Crawford and Bette Davis. These two legendary actresses clashed for decades, battling over film roles, romances, and award show recognition. What began as professional jealousy quickly spiraled into one of the most theatrical, petty, and bizarre rivalries Hollywood has ever witnessed. The seeds were planted in the 1930s, when Davis fell for her dangerous co-star, Franchot Tone. Crawford, already a rising star, allegedly seduced and married Tone out of spite. Davis never forgave her, and their animosity only deepened as their careers progressed. By the early 1960s, both actresses were considered past their prime, but they joined forces in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, a film that both revived their careers and intensified their hatred. On set, Crawford reportedly stuffed her costume with weights during a scene where Davis had to drag her across the floor, causing Davis to injure her back. In retaliation, Davis arranged for a Coca-Cola vending machine to be installed on set, knowing full well that Crawford was a Pepsi shareholder. Their rivalry reached its notorious peak at the 1963 Academy Awards. Davis was nominated for her role in Baby Jane, while Crawford was not. In an act of calculated revenge, Crawford volunteered to accept awards on behalf of absent nominees. When Anne Bancroft won Best Actress, Crawford swept past Davis to accept the Oscar on live television, smiling triumphantly as she held the golden statue. The insults and barbs continued for years. After Crawford's death in 1977, Davis famously quipped, "You should never say bad things about the dead, only good." Joan Crawford is dead. Good. Their feud became legend, inspiring countless books, documentaries, and even a miniseries. Yet beneath the theatrics lay a darker reality. Two women forced to survive in an industry that thrived on rivalry, pitting them against one another at every turn. Their story was not just about spite, it was also about endurance. Among the many myths tied to the Wizard of Oz, one of the strangest and most enduring is the so-called Munchkin hanging legend. According to this urban tale, a Munchkin actor, distraught over poor treatment on set, took his own life during filming, and the act was inadvertently captured on screen. The alleged moment occurs in the scene where Dorothy, the Scarecrow, and the Tin Man skip off into the forest singing "We're Off to See the Wizard." In the background, viewers claim to see a small figure swinging from a tree. Grainy VHS copies of the film in later decades only fueled speculation, with fans pausing and rewinding to study the supposed image. The truth, however, was far less tragic and far stranger. What the camera actually captured was a large bird, most likely a crane or an emu, flapping its wings in the background. MGM had released exotic birds onto the forest set to give the indoor production a more lifelike atmosphere. Despite official explanations from the studio, cast members, and film historians, the myth stubbornly persisted. Ironically, the fabricated tale became more famous than many of the very real dangers the cast endured. Actor Buddy Ebsen, the original Tin Man, was hospitalized when his aluminum-based makeup triggered a severe allergic reaction. Margaret Hamilton, who played the Wicked Witch, suffered third-degree burns during a botched pyrotechnic stunt. Even the snow in the poppy field scene was made of industrial-grade asbestos. So why did the Munchkin legend endure? Perhaps because it reflected a deeper suspicion about Hollywood, that beneath the glittering surface, something darker and more sinister lurked. In a bizarre twist, a completely false tragedy overshadowed the genuine hardships faced by the actors. The hanging Munchkin never existed, but the fact that millions believed it speaks volumes about the enduring power of myths and the blurred line between illusion and truth in Hollywood. Marlene Dietrich, one of the most iconic faces of cinema's golden age, understood better than most the power of image. Beyond her dazzling presence on screen, she was a meticulous master of control, even negotiating a contract clause that granted her authority over her own lighting. She not only demanded final approval of the cinematographer, but also personally supervised the setup of lights for her close-ups. Dietrich had learned the art of lighting from her collaborations with director Joseph von Sternberg and cinematographer Lee Garmis, who showed her how shadows, angles, and diffusion could transform a face. From that moment, she never left her appearance to chance. On set, Dietrich carried a mirror to inspect her look, and she traveled with her own lighting technician, Gene Kornman, to ensure her standards were met. Though directors sometimes bristled at her exacting demands, the results spoke for themselves. Dietrich always looked flawless. Her insistence on positioning a key light just above and to the side of her face gave her the ethereal glow that became her trademark. During the filming of Destry Rides Again, her clashes with studio technicians were so frequent that she effectively assumed part of the cinematographer's role. Today, when actors may seek script approval or final cut, her control might seem relatively minor. But in the 1930s and 1940s, an actress wielding that level of behind-the-camera influence was virtually unheard of. Dietrich's mastery of lighting cemented her image as untouchable, forever luminous in the eyes of her audience. She didn't do it for vanity. She did it to preserve a carefully constructed public image that became central to her star persona. Marlene Dietrich's famous lighting clause was not a frivolous diva demand. It was a calculated, strategic move from a woman who understood Hollywood's visual machinery better than most of her male peers. Her decision wasn't just eccentric. It revealed the personal agency she wielded in a male-dominated studio system. A bold assertion of control in an era when women were expected to have none. Tallulah Bankhead embodied rebellion. "No, Charles, it isn't true." "It never is true. I sometimes wish it were." Those words capture her spirit, defiant, witty, impossible to tame. Bankhead was one of Hollywood's most unconventional stars, a woman with a fiery personality and razor-sharp wit who broke every expectation the studios placed on her. Unlike her more bankable contemporaries, she carved out a niche as a boundary-pushing actress who lived and performed loudly. Born into Southern aristocracy and privilege, she came to Hollywood in the 1930s after gaining fame in London and on Broadway. While most actresses were coached to appear demure and refined, Bankhead flipped that notion on its head. She smoked cigars, swore freely, and was openly bisexual. At a time when studios invested heavily in heterosexual illusions for their stars. Her most iconic screen role came in Alfred Hitchcock's 1944 wartime drama Lifeboat, where she sparred with cast and crew alike. Famously, she refused to wear underwear, insisting it compromised the authenticity of her performance. When a crew member worried the camera might catch something it shouldn't, she shot back, "Well, darling, I don't wear underwear, and if you see anything you haven't seen before, just throw a net over it." Her resistance went beyond quips. She refused to tie herself to powerful studio heads like Louis B. Mayer or Daryl Zanuck by signing long-term contracts. The decision cost her steady work and the promotional machine that elevated other actresses, but it gave her freedom to speak, act, and live on her own terms. Bankhead's audacity made her a legend among peers and a queer icon long before such words existed. Her Hollywood career was short, but unforgettable. Wild yet brilliant, controversial yet respected, she was a living contradiction. In a world obsessed with image, Bankhead made sure hers was defiantly real. Her antics weren't just outrageous. They were revolutionary, openly challenging the studio system's control in ways as bold as they were bizarre. Then came Hollywood's first great scandal, the trial of Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle. S? Yes, you know what an S is, don't you? Oh, certainly an S. Well, that's an eye with a hook on each end. I beg your pardon. Arbuckle had been one of the silent era's most beloved comedians, a box office giant whose slapstick was adored worldwide. But in 1921, his career collapsed in a firestorm of scandal. At the center was the tragic death of aspiring actress Virginia Rapp, who fell ill at a party Arbuckle hosted at San Francisco's St. Francis Hotel. She died days later from peritonitis caused by a ruptured bladder. Arbuckle was arrested and charged with manslaughter, accused of causing her death during a sexual assault. Evidence was shaky at best, but the tabloid press ran wild, painting Arbuckle as a monster. Paramount shelved his films, theaters banned his work, and a man who had been adored was suddenly blacklisted. The legal ordeal stretched across 3 trials. The first 2 ended in hung juries. In the third, Arbuckle was acquitted, with the jury even issuing a formal apology declaring him innocent and wronged. But the apology came too late. His reputation was ruined, and his attempts to return under a pseudonym fell flat. The scandal reshaped Hollywood forever. In its aftermath, studios created the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America, MPPDA, led by Will Hayes. It was the seed of the production code, the strict set of moral standards that governed American cinema for decades. Arbuckle's downfall was more than personal tragedy. It showed how swiftly Hollywood could pivot from worship to vilification under media and public pressure. His case became the blueprint for studio damage control that would define the industry's approach to scandal. Loretta Young's story revealed another layer of Hollywood's obsession with image. On screen, she was the picture of beauty, talent, and devout Catholic faith. Off-screen, she carried a secret that the studios scrambled to bury, a pregnancy, the result of an affair with Clark Gable, married at the time, and the undisputed king of Hollywood. Their romance blossomed during the filming of The Call of the Wild in 1935. For Young, the pregnancy threatened not only her career, but also immense personal shame, given her Catholic faith. The studio stepped in with a cover-up. Young vanished from the spotlight, supposedly ill, and quietly gave birth in secret. Her baby, Judy Lewis, was placed in an orphanage, only for Young to adopt her months later, presenting her as an abandoned child. The charade held for years. Judy grew up unaware of her true parentage, though persistent rumors dogged her, especially because of her striking resemblance to Gable. Her ears, like his, were surgically altered as a child to quell gossip. Gable never acknowledged her. Young, bound by silence, confessed the truth only privately to Judy years later. Judy would recount the revelation in her memoir, finally confirming what Hollywood had long whispered. This wasn't just a story of a forbidden romance. It was proof of how far studios would go to shield their stars. In the golden age of Hollywood, the illusion mattered more than the truth. Loretta Young's decision to keep her secret illustrates the suffocating pressures actresses faced to protect their image at any cost. Her silence was survival, her resilience extraordinary, and so the golden age of Hollywood was never as pristine as the silver screen suggested. These stories, 15 in all, though one remains more infamous myth than fact, pull back the velvet curtain to reveal a world stranger, darker, and more complicated than any fiction it ever produced.